The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below. Hey there, this is your orchestration tutor Thomas Goss, bringing you the very last lecture of this entire series on Mussorgsky's Pictures at an Exhibition, as orchestrated by Maurice Ravel. As you can see, we just have 2 more pages of piano score to go, but that translates into about a half a dozen more pages, which I have stretched out across 4 screens. So it's quite a lot to get through. So we're going to just pace ourselves and work through it, starting with an analysis of the piano score. Meno mosso, sempre maestoso, so always majestically, but not as fast. And here's where the music restates the melody spread across the piano, very similar as to before, with a 6/3 chord in the bass rather than a root chord, and just expressing everything as half-note triplets spread across 2 bars, and so on, interspersed with a few bars of just straight half notes, which provides a really cool rhythmic contrast, I feel, and also a bit of emphasis as well, right? Because it's expressing certain parts of the melody in a way that brings out those particular parts of the phrase. After the restatement of the melody, Mussorgsky has got this bit of a build in terms of energy, harmonically positioning things, getting a little bit further and further out. We got A double flats, B double flats, just really kind of building things up to a frantic place here. Then here's this really cool section of whole note triplets. Bum, 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 bum. A very cool way of encapsulating the energy and getting ready to release it. The tempo slowing down each time as it introduces more parts. And there's a final statement of the melody at the end, along with these extremely effective grace notes. Boom, crash, boom, crash, boom, crash, bum, bum, boom, crash, bum. This is the best right here, these grace notes that leap outwards from the center. Then we're back to the whole downbeat, upbeat thing that we saw when Mussorgsky was doing a callback to Boris Godunov. Crunch, smash, right? We're still locked into that idea. And in fact, you could almost think of this as a triplet version of that, right? Ending with just a finale of E-flat octaves. Completed the 22nd of June, 1874 in St. Petersburg. It's a really titanic way to end a suite, and you can see the attractions for a concert pianist if you have the right mindset. You know, if you're not kind of blocked off to letting things go and being over the top and embracing that sort of brutal romanticism as people would have felt it back when this was written. So I see the attractions for Russian concert pianists, and now more pianists in the West who are playing this. One of my best piano students walked in and auditioned to study with me by playing Nomus, for instance, right? So it's something that is making its way more into the standard repertoire. And I feel it really deserves a place there, not just because of the context of it being a terrific orchestral work, thanks to Ravel and other orchestrators. So before we see what Ravel did with it, let's have a listen to these last 2 titanic pages in their piano version. And I really want to thank my friend, the pianist Sofia Urivieva Martin, who contributed the terrific performance that I used for these last 3 lectures. I wish I could have used her throughout the entire series, but I don't know if she recorded pictures at an exhibition in their entirety, but it's enough just to have had her contribution to our introductory video and here at the end again, and really playing in such a symphonic way that it just begs to be orchestrated and has the same commitment of energy that you hear in the orchestral version, which we'll study in a minute. So here we see elements being repurposed and reinterpreted. So for instance, the sheer harmonic and melodic expression of what's going on, the chorale, is being given to our winds and brass here, while the strings are supplying that triplet pulse, not jumping back and forth, because that is just a little too acrobatic and doesn't really have the same meaning in an orchestral setting. But you've got the bum, 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 bum happening here along to bum, 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 bum. Notice how when the winds and heavy brass take up the triplets, bum, 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 the strings just become simple dotted whole notes. So there's no need for them all to be triplet. In fact, it's nice to have this sudden reverse of texture and function. This is rather nice, though, the hemiola here, the 3 against the 2, between the winds and brass and the strings. And it's really just built for that big triplety build back up to the top again, which is such a Hollywood convention, isn't it? It's a very simple thing to do to build up energy going back to your melody, especially when it's very, very big and high like this. Okay, so that is really what's going on in this page. What more do I need to say, except for just to notice the placement harmonically of all of these different bits of harmony and melody. 3 on flutes, and oboes supplying the harmony below that along to clarinets. Oboes plus clarinets is a very Tchaikovskyan thing, and something I think is also in Rimsky-Korsakov here and there. But he liked to do that when he couldn't figure out what else to do with them. Just really emphasize the melody with strings and winds, and perhaps first trumpet an octave below that, as we see here, and then have the oboes and clarinets basically supply the harmony in between those elements. Really love the high notes here as well on bass clarinet. So that is actually not all that high. It's a ninth below where the clarinets are, but it still is playing that same melody, right? So this is E flat, F, bum, 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 but down an octave. Really kind of the same approach as before, isn't it? We have 3-part harmony in the trumpets, playing a version of what happened at the beginning of this movement. We have the trombones playing 3-part harmony below that. We have the horns crossing over between the trumpets and the trombones and filling it out. And we have the tuba, playing a G, walking down to E flat. Here, Ravel just cannot resist but to underline the tonic right here, rather than playing the 5th of the chord. Just adds a solid E flat there, just to secure where it is. And less is more, right? In terms of what the timpani is doing, especially if you want it to be majestic. If you have too much going on, then it subtracts rather than adding to the excitement. We still have the bass drum underlining those big B-flat accents, but we're adding cymbal at the beginning of each new melodic phrase, right? Whenever we start with an E flat and we climb or we make it part of a melodic statement, there goes the tish. Nice big whole notes there. Then we just have the strings playing essentially the same harmonic positions as the trumpets, right? We've got an E flat major 6/3 chord here. Same thing in violas and violins, spread out across 3 octaves. Changing to a B flat triad in all of those same parts. And then we've got an E flat 6/4 chord. Same thing, right? So it's pretty straightforward in terms of the harmony. I really love the way the rhythmic contrasts are maintained between the sections and just the sheer mass of everything that is going on here. And, of course, the use of bass clarinet to double the lower melodic voice an octave below the first trumpet and so on. It's just really tasty. Big cinematic scoring. So let's have a listen to that. Not that there's a whole lot going on, but it's easy to get lost in the sheer mass of things that are happening. And I won't recap the page, just remember what I talked about, and I'll see you on the next screen. And that takes us to here, which is essentially what I think of as a modulatory passage. Mussorgsky is setting things up for the really big climax to come on the next page. And it really is all one idea, but I'm going to break it up into 2 separate lecture segments just so that you can go back and forth listening to what I just talked about rather than one really long, complicated tutti introduced by a simpler section. So this is a fairly simple section. If your score reading and transposition is good, you can see that the clarinets and flutes are essentially doubling each other at the octave, with the first bassoon taking the position of the 3rd flute, and then the bass clarinet underpinning the cellos down here. And then, of course, the 2nd bassoon supplying those essential parts of the harmony, like, say, F here, which we also see in the violas, and so on. G, there's that G. And here is a lovely little handoff, right? We have our flutes continuing on like this. 3rd flute dovetailing over to 1st oboe, and then eventually the clarinets dovetailing with the flutes. So that frees up the flutes here, and we get a different timbre on top of here as the music starts to crescendo, a bit firmer, right? This is interesting to see the oboe being a subsidiary, sort of almost like the third clarinet, in the same way that this line down here was the third flute's line, right? So it's just basically shifting functions between the voices. Bass clarinet, though, continues on in its doubling of the cello line. And we also add the bassoon here, right? And contrabassoon coming in at an octave lower. So that gives a nice solid foundation as the music starts to build. What I feel is the real trade-off here is the introduction of the horns in terms of supplying this unison here, second and third, right? What is Ravel doing here? Probably would have been easier just to have the second and fourth or the first and the third. But he's giving the first time to come in here on this E flat and prepare it, which is nice. And then he has the first and the fourth working together in octaves. And this is just some typical four-part harmony and so on, making the center of this harmony warm. So it's fairly simply scored. So just basically think of it this way. We've got three-part harmony here at an octave with that nice root tone right here in the bassoons. Plus, we've got this low A flat here chugging along, supported by bass clarinet. And then when things start to switch over here, the flutes have slowly evolved over into three-part clarinets in the same basic orchestral register. And the bassoons here, playing these A flats and so on, become part of a four-part harmony with the horns, which eventually just turns into four horns, so that the second bassoonist can take over on supporting the bass here. So let's have a listen to that. It's very simple scoring. It's a pretty basic part, and like I said, it's really more of a transition over into the next page, which is a very big tutti, but we'll study that on its own. So let's just hear this first. Now, for the big tutti, which is really two ideas, right? There's the build up to this massive fortissimo, forte, however you want to think it's being played. I should think forte crescendo leading to this would really be like a triple F for the strings and winds, and a fortissimo for the brass. Of course, the brass are not marked really F crescendo, are they? That is mezzo forte crescendo here from the heavy brass, leading to here, forte accents. So, yeah, I mean, some composers try to stay away from triple F and so on, and I can understand their reasonings to some degree. I never go above triple F really myself in my own scoring, and usually I use it to signify that both the strings and winds are playing against fortissimo brass. So I want the fortissimo brass sound, but I want the strings and winds to be louder than that. So I want them to try to outplay, to really just give as much force as they possibly can to a tutti, usually, around or over or inside the brass. So that's usually when I use triple F. I don't just throw it around with abandon. So there's some really cool stuff here. Let's check out this section by section. The first thing that really draws the eye are these staccato half notes, which makes perfect sense, by the way, in 3/2. Anything that is in cut time or 3/2 that is going at a faster pace will generally accept things like half notes with staccatos and so on, because the pace is so much more accelerated. Here we've got the oboes working in three-part harmony above the brass, right? And if you check this out, it's essentially the same notes, right? We've got this written C, which is a concert F, an octave below the oboe here. And then this goes to B flat, which is this E flat here, and so on. And then we've got this B flat here, which supplies the octave below this E flat. Now, as the music gets louder and louder, what's cool is that Ravel transfers over this to the trumpets. And the trumpets basically just take over the entire idea, and they're dancing around there with 3 horns. The 4th horn gets a little bit of a break because they're not really needed. So what is the function of this? It is basically to give more weight to this right here. We have changed from a sort of a 6/4/2/2 to a definitely dedicated 3/2 by these instruments that are sort of swirling back and forth. There really is a sort of a swirly sound here, and it's really not that swirly. It's just Divisi strings and flutes an octave higher than that, essentially kind of supplying the same exact part. Notice that here it's very much the same as the oboes and the horns, right? The horns are basically playing the harmony that is the beginning of each one of these pairs of notes, right? So right here we've got a B flat, an E flat, and an F stuck together. Same thing that is going on here. This F is a B flat, this B flat is an E flat, and this C is an F. So it's the same exact chord, really, when you put all 3 of these voices together, the lower divisi second violins plus the violas. So it's basically playing this along with the horns and then transferring over or slurring over to the other chord and then playing that chord along with the horns and so on and so forth. And the same thing is happening above with the divisi upper second violins plus the first violins, doubling what's going on with the oboes. The same thing, sort of swirling back and forth. And then above all of that, we've got the flutes doing the same thing as the firsts and upper divisi second violins. Yeah, so pretty intense. Then Ravel decides to go divisi in 3, and he basically takes over the pitches of the flutes with the strings. So that adds a lot more tone weight, a lot more brilliant color up there, even though really, for most intents and purposes, the flutes are really not doing anything all that different. Same thing is going on here, an octave lower with the clarinets doubling the seconds. And then these little pitches are just basically going back and forth and providing some context for the middle strings, the violas and second violins, divisi, and so on. So it just gets more and more massive and more optimistic. And if everybody is really pushing into this crescendo, it has this wonderful effective momentum. But really an intelligent way of using horns and trumpets, right? And of course, the oboes right here. And what else is going on there? Well, the lower strings are just pulsing away on those very low sets of 3 notes. They are being doubled by A2 bassoons, playing as low as they possibly can and then going up when they can't, right? They can't play a low A flat along with the contrabassoon in unison, so they are placed up there on that higher A flat and so on. But actually it's interesting how many of these pitches can be doubled by or tripled by the bassoons and contrabassoon. And the bass clarinet basically just plays whatever pitches it can, which back then it was not really built to play the low B flat as much as you might think. There were some models out there, I think by the 20s, that could reach a low concert B flat, but the bass clarinet that Ravel was most experienced with would not be able to reach that note. So this is an octave higher than the bassoons, so that is doubling the cellos. And meanwhile, we also have some support here. We've got E flat and F, playing as this lovely major second that sort of pushes through here, and the tuba doubling the bass clarinet part, and then this middle voice in here of the third trombone. And you add the timpani to that, and you have this enormous harmonic pressure leading towards rehearsal figure 120. And here's where we get the bum, 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 bum. And it's really like a whole note triplet across 2 bars. But if you think in 3/2, then it just becomes regular note values that fit into that particular meter. And any instrument that wasn't already in 3/2 is corrected to go to 3/2 so that they can all be given the same beats by the conductor. So now we're getting into this second part. The melody is really in the bass. So we've got our low strings working together in octaves, pretty much. Here there's a unison. And they're being doubled by every powerful bass instrument that Ravel can pile in there. What you'll hear the most are the third trombone and tuba, just shoving away at these 6 notes. And they'll be doubled by the contrabassoon, which is being doubled by the second bassoon, and so on. And then the first bassoon is being doubled by the bass clarinet. And above that, we've got this wonderful harmony with these dropping Gs here, and then dropping E flats in the third flute and second and third oboe. So actually very nicely balanced, I would say, right? We've got these thirds also expressed by the clarinets. It works out pretty well. And this harmony in here is really nice. The flutes are really not going to come through at all, but it doesn't matter because these oboes and clarinet plus the trumpets and trombones are going to just really plow through there harmonically. This low G here is actually rare for Ravel to score. He tries to stay away from very low notes in his C trumpet, but here he just lets it blast, and it is an effective note if you've got a good lower player on trumpet. Usually you don't really think of trumpet players as being high players and low players, but when you've got a third trumpet situation, they'd better have a good lip going all the way down to F sharp. And here is one place where they can really showcase that. As far as these first chords here are concerned, they're pretty standard in the way that they're laid out. It's really, really good here for first and second to be playing an octave, and acceptable for the third and fourth to be playing the harmony in the middle. And then, of course, we've got an octave higher than that, the same exact harmony with first and third trumpet playing octaves with the E flat in the middle there on second trumpet. And, of course, this fill-in harmony here with E flat and G in the trombones. Yeah, so really, really nice, crisp, majestic, magnificent playing. And notice how these sort of reaction chords here in between each group of 2 bars are wholly given over to the brass, plus a little bit of bassoon under there, just to really underpin what the tuba is doing and make it very secure. Really great use of percussion as well. Typical crash on the cymbal. Really great hit here on the bass drum. And notice how this works rhythmically. It's like bum, 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 right? So every 2 beats in 3/2, we're getting a hit by something. Twice on timpani and then once on bass drum. And it's actually really great to have bass drum be the very last and lowest hit, because that is the most nebulous of the pitches, right? It doesn't really have a pitch. It's an untuned drum, but it still has the kind of lowest general region of sound. So let's listen to all of that. That is a lot to take in. I mean, it's just almost too much for me to say, hey, listen for this and listen for that. But yeah, definitely listen to how bright the scoring is here from 120. Just how much the heavy brass here just leaps out along to essentially what would be cuivre horns, just really blasting. And how that is all the same balanced by position with the winds and strings way on top and all of the bass instruments possible playing this bass melody below. And then, of course, listen to the build leading up to that, the roll on the timpani, the central core here of trombones, tuba, and bass winds underneath these dancing half-note staccatos and these swirling upper winds and strings. Okay? And then we will look at the very last screen for this entire series of lectures. So here we are on the very last screen for this entire series of lectures and for this last lecture. And I'm feeling the same sense of being overwhelmed as I was when I put these last 2 pages together to fit this landscape-oriented screen. So bear with me, please. Both harps basically just chugging along, not really being heard by anybody, and in fact there's not even any attempt to have them do anything here. I think that a big upward sweep glissando would be just too cliche, right? There was already a glissando earlier in this movement. It's best to keep them at a minimum, and there's so much impact here at the end it doesn't really require it. So this is the element that you're not going to hear and is sort of unimportant to the lecture. I just thought I'd point it out first. Okay. So what happens now is just the final statement of the melody. Bum, 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 bum. And then bum, bum, bum. And then that is repeated 3 times, along with a sort of a reaction in the bass. And then one big final sweeping whoosh with a big accent at the end. All right. So that's where we are oriented. And once again, it's very simple, straightforward, big Tutti scoring with a few expert touches by Ravel. If we look at the strings, we've got those same triple stop grace notes leading to a very, very strong note at the end. So it's like, I would imagine down up, right? Or you might want to watch the Thailand Philharmonic Orchestra or other orchestras and see how those players deal with this. But I would say a really, really powerful down bow here on the grace note would give you all the length you would need to push back here with a nice long up bow, which maintains the energy, right? So the up bow tends to get stronger towards the end as the bow rises towards the frog. So you could just go down, up, down, up. So if you make this really a violent, powerful down bow, then you can basically do this as down, up, down, up, down, up. The position of the melody notes is all very basic. First violins in divisi octaves, pretty much all the way through. Now notice how instead of playing down a third, going to this B flat, marcato B flat, right? The strings are just diving down to this low B flat. Actually, in a very funny way, it's the violas who are playing the higher B flat, right? This is B flat in the middle of this treble clef, right? So they are just staying kind of right around where they are to keep things as simple as possible. And then we've got the seconds taking the harmony in the middle of those big octaves of the first violins. I keep wanting to say right hand. And then we've got some more harmony here in the violas playing around those octaves, right? So these thirds here, this G and B flat third, is playing under the top divisi first violins. And then this G and B flat third is playing under the bottom rank of divisi first violins. So it's an extremely thick, powerful sound. And that's basically the structure of this harmonized chorale for both the strings and the winds, right? We've got G, B flat, and E flat going on here for the flutes and for the oboes and for the clarinets. They don't have an extra concert G right there, but that's all right. They don't need it. So extremely powerful doubling of the strings. And then here we've got the trumpets taking the lower rank, right? So this was the upper rank of all this doubling with the upper divisi firsts and second violins. Now doubling the lower divisi firsts and violas, we've got the trumpets. And you are going to hear these trumpets just stand right out. It is helpful that the middle strings here are covering the same territory. Without them, it would sound really different, but you're still not going to hear those strings out in the forefront of the harmony at all with these trumpets blasting away in the middle. And we have the same exact approach here that we did before with trombones taking another three-part harmony approach below that, which across both sets of trumpets and trombones, we've got the horns playing. So it's really very much like the beginning of this piece when we had just a big brass chorale. And here there's absolutely no doubt we're going to hammer home this tonic here and sort of sit on it like we did a couple passages ago and just give in to having a very, very grounded timpani stroke. And we're being reminded here the little notes are on the beat. So the grace notes go bum-bum, not bum-bum. It's really cool how the alternating stroke here is mainly just taken over by the tam-tam and the chime, right? I mean, that's it. What else is going on here in terms of hitting the downbeat? The harps. Nobody's going to hear that. So, ba-bum, dong, ba-bum, dong, right? That's what's going on. Bum, or bum-bum, dong, bum, bum, boosh. Because Ravel left out a chime stroke so as not to be too boring and repetitive. So that is really just the structure. And then we have these climbing chords. And at this point, we start to hear a little bit of reinforcement of every second downbeat, which is accompanied once again by chime and tam-tam. And then chord, brass reaction, chord, brass reaction. And notice how the brass reaction chords are essentially inversions of what is happening before. So we're taking this 6/4 chord and turning it into a root E-flat chord. We are taking this nicely harmonized E-flat 6/4 chord an octave lower, and we're turning that into simple E-flat unisons, and further underscoring what's going on here. If there's so much weight on these E-flat unisons, then we can just have the G and the B-flat doubled by the first and second trombones that are being played by the first and second trumpets. So it's a good trade-off, and we can also fill in some of this harmony here with the lower heavy brass. Okay. So after a couple of those shots and a couple of completely invisible harp notes, we just sit on that chord that happened before. Really, it's just the same thing that we heard every odd-numbered bar here. Then all you've got to do is just add this timpani roll, add a triangle roll, and a cymbal roll, and you end up with this massive slamming chord here right at the end. So that's all pretty easy to work out in terms of a tutti. In fact, it's one of the simplest tuttis in this entire piece, but nonetheless effective, right? It's masterfully written, it's beautifully filled in. It would be a case study in enormous tutti chords. And in fact, this entire page would be great to take apart to just study the tutti chords, and I may do that if I do another video on tutti chords in the future. So anyhow, let's have a listen to this final majestic page as performed by the Thailand Philharmonic and its great conductor Alfonso Scarano. And I want to, in this very last moment of this very last lecture, really once again thank them for agreeing to provide the music for this series of lectures. It has been amazingly invaluable to me and my students and thousands of musicians out there who are going to study these lectures in the future. We really thank you from the bottom of our hearts. It has been great being partners with you in this endeavor and hearing your music accompany all of these lectures. Thank you so much from all of us.